Well, guys, I'm here in Westminster, South Carolina, here at this fifth annual Bigfoot Festival. Yes. So I'm gonna go check this out, and I'm gonna show you what I'm looking at right now. And sorry about the music. I'm gonna try to talk over it. All kinds of stuff. Look at that crowd. All right, let's turn this off.
Don't have. We're looking at an aspect of Bigfoot that nobody has really looked at in depth or really brought it to out. What we have here is Sunny Westcott. She is from around Washington, D.C. I'll let her talk about where she works, but you're going to be impressed when she starts speaking. Listen to every word. If you blink your eye, close your ears, you're going to miss something because she's got a lot of information. She's brilliant at what she talks about. Did anybody get to see her this morning? Did anybody see her this morning? She talked about government conspiracies, and believe me, she might know a little bit about stuff like that. Okay? But I really hope you enjoy it. Please visit our vendors. Thank you for coming. We love you all, and with that, I'm going to grab my little pink megaphone, and I'm going to step to the back before I go set up. We love you. Thank you for coming. Sunny, it's all yours.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. I'm Sunny Westcott. I'm Homeland Security's Chief Meteorologist, so I do all of our extreme weather outreach for our 16 critical infrastructure sectors. I work within the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, which is a sister agency to FEMA. I also get to do a lot of our research when it comes to anything that's climatologically shifting. So that's everything from operations. I'm a prior Air Force lead meteorologist, which means I did the forecast for flights, troop movements, drop zones, tanks, deployments in general. I got to do a lot with our air traffic control towers. When we talk about aviation do-don'ts, when we talk about changes that are happening to the built infrastructure. And I'm also leading within the Naval Postgraduate School Center for Defense and Homeland Security a paper on barometric implications to the human body, and that's where you hear those people who say, I know it's going to rain because my knees hurt. So I actually do have a ton of research that we'll cover at the very end on the human impacts, as well as some of the more fun ways to consider climate when you're out there interacting within these zones, some of the extreme tendencies that are going on. So I'm going to start with going through a couple of obvious fan favorites because I think it's fun and I don't often get to talk about these topics at work. Right now, as you all may have guessed, I am a furloughed employee. As the chief met, I pretty much can do whatever I want though, so I'm here at my own capacity because I can. So these are some of the cryptids that when I went through and I made a list, these are the ones that, in general, I've either talked about, researched, interacted with different communities in some way, shape, or form. A lot of the people who are impacted or get the best results from going out and experiencing weather and recording weather are often out in some way, shape, or form, either hiking along major trails for sightings or just out and about in nature, which obviously is not going to be most of the federal force. So I rely very heavily on the local perspective, and that gives me a lot of ground truth. So I'm also on Wednesdays on Sirius XM with the Road Dog Trucking Group, doing conversations with the truckers to hear about some of the pain, stress points that they're going through so that I can implement even more knowledge into my presentation decks. So I'm going to go ahead and tip the slides a little bit just so that I don't get cut off a little bit more there. I wonder if I can zoom out. Oh, I have to bring it in further. Okay, well, this is just where we're at. Good news is for those of you who are in the back, I'll also go back to the front at the end, which this QR code in the middle is the slide deck. I'm a big purveyor of ground truth, which means that I don't hide my resources or my information or my decks from anybody. These are all open. You can search my name, and you can also find the same website that houses all the decks that I've ever used, as well as a lot of YouTube videos, different podcasts that I've been a part of, all of those fun things. So I'll put it back up again. If anybody wants to follow along, it's probably easier to read some of the fun stats and trends and graphics. So what we're going to be talking about, obviously starting out with different biomes, understanding how some of the weather pivots can impact things like the habitat of different creatures. So when we talk about Bigfoot, we're obviously talking about mammals and some of the changes that can happen with mammals when we're talking about climatological shifts. So you guys know that when it's hot outside, different parts of your body swell in different ways. So your fingers turn into sausages, your toes don't get the same circulation. You end up more aggressive, honestly, which is why we see increases in road rage during the summer. On the tail end of that, when we're talking about major changes in our low pressure systems, that's the barometric low that causes rain, snow, thunderstorms, lightning, hail, tropical cyclones of all forms, so that's anything from a tropical storm to a hurricane or a typhoon. Those are all our low pressure systems. Lows are often attributed to things like suicidal ideation, lethargy, depression, manic episodes, as well as things like sinus pain, joint pain, general inflammation on the human body, because what is a low pressure? It is a depth in the atmosphere pushing down as an additive to gravity, essentially. So many of you may not even realize you're feeling the low, but that is often what triggers those kinds of migraine onsets and pressure points on the body. The more damage your body has, the better a barometer you are. What is a barometer if not just a vial of water that sits on a desk? And we used to use it for way back in the day to tell when storms are coming. It's just literally a vial of water sits on a desk with a spout. When a low would come in, it would push the water out the spout from in the upper atmosphere. Your body's predominantly a liquid, as are most mammals. There and by, when the low comes in, it pushes the water where? Into any given weak crevice it can find, which exacerbates a lot of pain. So when we're looking at some of the changes that are happening in the atmosphere, a big part of what I study is what's actually changing. Everyone wants to blame climatological shifts on abnormal heating, and that's partially the truth. Whenever you heat anything, it expands. Water molecules, air parcels are included in that, as are fat cells. So in that notion, what we're really talking about is that the troposphere, where we all live, fly, operate, eat, grow our food, what's actually happening when we talk about abnormal heating is that the heating that happens either on our continent, on the Asian continent, across Europe, doesn't matter as long as it's in the northern hemisphere, changes the way our membrane of the troposphere operates. It actually increases its height. So the troposphere is now pushing on the stratosphere more and more, which is allowing our thunderstorms to get taller. That also causes our low pressures to get deeper and our highs to get higher. So you're going to notice a lot more impacts to different habitats. So that's habitats for everything from different creatures to us as creatures on this planet, as well as some of the different migration impacts. So if you are so uncomfortable out and about because it's hot, what are you going to do? Are you day in, day out going to stay in that heat wave and in that discomfort? No, you're likely going to move into higher elevations to escape into colder climates. You're going to go deeper into caves to get into that cold pocket of air, or you're going to relocate in totality. So that's what we're seeing with the mammals. They're changing their sex patterns, which means the nesting cycles are also starting to pivot. A lot of you already know this if you hunt or fish. You know what cold fronts do to animals. You know barometric fishing, you know cold front with deer. Same general concept happens not only to humans but to various animal groups. So it's important to track when we're saying that there's a change, that the change is happening at such a high level of the atmosphere that we are only in the symptoms down here at the surface. So this applies in our oceans as well. So when we're talking about oceans and lakes, we'll also talk about the Kraken. Don't worry, I can make it apply to everything. So when we're looking at changes to our lake systems, when it's abnormally hot, and we see things like drought and evaporation trends, right? Everything that gets hot will eventually give up its moisture in some way, shape, or form as sweating. We're also seeing, because the atmosphere is getting taller, there's a greater intensity in winds, both ahead of and behind the storm. More prevailing winds makes it harder to do prescribed burns, so wildfires will inevitably continue to get worse. But then when the winds do come, they are too strong and our wildfires blow out of control. What happens with that smoke? What burns in a wildfire? Usually our natural minerals and materials, things like arsenic and mercury, get lifted into the atmosphere in particulates. Those then deposit into things like our snowpack, into our hills, into the forests. Then our heavy rains come, wash it into the wells and into the reservoirs. What ends up happening from that? Algae blooms absolutely love wildfire smoke. So you'll notice that there's an increase in algae pretty much across the board. It seems to be everywhere. We're seeing an increase in toxic algae blooms as well, which acts as a paralytic agent if you interact with it as a human. So on that side of the house, some of the major threats that we're seeing is that algae is Earth's natural way of trying to cool down the water. So we're going to continue to interact with more algae. We're going to interact with more bacteria because bacteria loves warm water. As we start to see more flash flooding, we'll also see more amoebas make their way up the river systems because they can't quite get into the salt water, but they do love the fresh water that comes down from a heavy rainfall and they can puddle jump. Things like, and this is one of my favorites, the brain-eating amoeba, which is slowly but surely on the rise and actually just killed, I think, 23 in India not too long ago. We have it in about 9 of our states here in the US. Mortality rate's about a 97 to 98% rate, so obviously not great to interact with. However, far harder to find typically. As things continue to warm in any abnormal manner, it can add to these kinds of threats. So when we're talking about what lives where and some of the risks to the habitat, it's everything from if there's too much algae, it sucks out the oxygen, the fish die. We're seeing greater rates of fish kill from that twofold. One, water's getting too hot, algae chokes it out. The other side, with barometric lows, we know that fish dive down deeper. The deeper the low, the deeper the fish dive. We're seeing that fish are diving down too far to sustain, blowing out their fish bladder and dying. So this is a really interesting sort of twofold that's happening in the natural biome. Any pivot in the upper level of the atmosphere comes with this kind of cascade down to the surface. So you can see in each one of these, I know it's a little cut off, I couldn't move for it, I'm just a little lazy. Some of the different ways that these threats spread, we're also seeing an increase in things like our ticks. That's a major problem set, right? A lot of us know about the Lone Star tick, which causes an allergy in the human body to red meats. So nobody likes to see that continue to spread, and yet here we are. It's not only spreading, but we're seeing things like Zika virus going up. That came over from Africa, from the mosquitoes. What other mosquito-borne illness has made its way into the U.S.? We have yellow fever, dengue fever, and malaria have all entered into the U.S. over the last couple of years at greater rates, which means we're now going to have to start looking at what does it mean to operate in a more tropical climate down south. And you would think, well, this is really just a southern U.S. problem, but as these puddles and abnormal heating continue, it allows for more mosquito breeding grounds. So we're going to see these continue to move, and as they move, things that feed off of that food chain will be impacted as well. So this isn't just a human impact, this is also our rodents changing. For those of you who didn't know, as it gets abnormally hot, rodents get smaller. So our field mice, which is a really interesting study, are shrinking in size, which also means that they're easier to get into nooks and crannies and are able to get into homes a lot easier, bringing in things like the bubonic plague in the desert southwest, which continues to propagate only because people keep going to Madagascar. Other things when we're talking about major pivots in some of our atmospherics, when it gets abnormally hot, bats absolutely hate the heat. We are losing our bats at a greater rate. And a lot of people say, well, bats are a vector for illness. Maybe that's not that bad. Not true. We need bats. They eat the mosquitoes. The mosquitoes carry a lot more illness. So it becomes a sort of push-pull in what you do want, what you don't want, how you want to interact in the biome, but it is a change in the biome nonetheless to annotate. Now, the best part about being able to attribute some of these things is that you know abnormal heating can also change the size of your birds. Will also make them smaller, more lightweight, needing less. Same thing with our vegetation. The vegetation will also start to compress, shrink down, which means you'll need more fields to grow the same amount of food. And then when we're looking at some of the changes, the membrane in the wingspan in bats will also start to change from extreme heat within the cave system. So you can attribute any of the changes in the natural environment to any of our fun cryptids, which makes this a fascinating field of study, because as these continue to change, it also means that some of these creatures and their sightings could be attributed further into areas which have never seen them before and would not be prepared for an experience like that. So as we're saying that bats are starting to change where their covens are, this can contribute to a lot of shifts throughout various biomes because bats play a large role in what animals move in what directions. Things like our butterflies and the other insects which drive our birds. The birds drive the wildcats drive also the deer and the sheep. So you can see how this would eventually propagate into other creatures that feed off of that food chain. So when we're looking at some of the fun ones, New Jersey's a great example. Anything that happens in New Jersey, a lot of times they escape the conversation. Most recently, they've been in a pretty notable drought. They've had a very sizable earthquake, and they have had record-breaking wildfires for the last couple of years consistently in their national forest. So within that, what are we talking about when we say, why do we care about drought outside of food and ag concerns? Water is the heaviest thing that moves naturally on this earth. There's only as much water on the earth as there ever has been, as there ever will be. We get no fresh water injects from space. We don't have an atmospheric river connection to Mars. Thereby, water needs to continue to rotate in a very particular way on the earth as the earth rotates, thus our Coriolis force, which drives our weather. When you see a change in your water, such as drought, like New Jersey and New York have recently, your water falls to the weakest part of your plate, which is often along your fault lines. If your fault lines start to see a pressure shift from either flash flood or drought variance too greatly, you will see an increase in seismic activity. As we annotated, that earthquake happened on a north-south fault line for New York, New Jersey, which is why they experienced such an intense shake. In Syria and Turkey, that massive quake that killed all those people was because they overpumped an aquifer that ripped open and created a new chasm very similar to the Grand Canyon. So when we talk about water allocation and the consistency of implication for animals, it is very important to keep in mind that any creature can face a biome shift from something either we cause or we trigger the beginning of a ripple effect on that tail end of it. So habitat changes can be anything from the shift in the available food source to the shift in the availability to hide. Any sort of natural nesting area will also then pivot because the vegetation will pivot. What is happening with our water table is also of critical note because, as I mentioned, water falls to the lowest elevation. If it falls too fast, it'll bypass shallow entry points for things like aquifers and streams, and it will also result in things like uneven distribution of the snowpack, which will result in less snowpack sticking around throughout the year. So we are seeing in some of our different mountain sets, you may have seen in Russia and in China this year that they reported rapid loss of snowpack, thereby avalanches were through the roof. We also saw an overflowing river system occur twice in Russia across the longest river on that continent. And that resulted in a lot of panic because that water flowed into a uranium mine. What does it mean to have uranium water out there? We don't fully know because they didn't disclose that information, but it's something to keep in the back of your mind. As you go to hike, as you go to hunt, as you go to interact in the natural environment, we say it's getting a little bit worse. We do mean more people are dying in avalanches. Do they need to die in avalanches? No. But we are losing them nonetheless. The avalanche activity is going up here, it's going up across Europe, across Russia and China, and that's the real problem set, is explaining the natural shift. We're not saying that you can't go out and into the snow, we're saying you need to be aware of the heightened risk. And that you need to take that into account when making plans for emergency supplies. When you're going to track, I'm from the desert Southwest, I'm from Arizona. Naturally, I'm part Apache, part Scottish, so very separate sides, but both very aggressive. There's I think why I became a meteorologist, so I can argue with people. The other side of the house is when you go to track things like any sort of aviation-based creature, is when I say the atmosphere is getting taller, it's getting more unstable, this means your thunderstorms are going to get stronger. You're going to see more lightning strikes. We've reported in Australia in February from a decaying tropical system this year, they saw 2 million lightning strikes in one day in one city. I don't even know what that looks like timing-wise, if the sky is just strobing. Not 100% sure, but they also saw 3 feet of rain from that. Here in the US this year, we reported in Texas a 2.2 mile wide tornado and 7.25 inch diameter hail. Is that our record-breaking hail? No, that was a couple of years back. Before that, in South Dakota at 8 inch plus diameter, which is bowling ball sized hail coming down at 150 miles per hour. So when we're saying be aware of the threat, if I issue as a meteorologist a warning for a severe weather event with large damaging hail, be aware you are risking death by ignoring that warning. We cannot stop bowling balls from hitting you if you are outside. So this is the part of taking our watches, warnings, and advisories seriously, because when you're out here trying to find any sort of an event to record, I love that you're out there because, again, I need that ground truth. I need the videos of you in that thunderstorm. I do, but I don't like that you die at the end of it. So the goal becomes recording from a safe place, like a cave, outward and into nature. So if you see that we put out a tornado warning, I like the video of the tornado. I will watch it as your roof flies off. I will watch that video. Subsequently, I would like more videos, so the goal would be for you to be safe. So the other side of the house, when we're talking about sighting shifts, some of these creatures, as we say, thunderstorms are getting worse, they're traveling further across the US, they're staying intact. This means more area coverage for things like this, right? So if we're saying that these are attributable to storms, storms are now becoming larger, they're punching through the atmosphere more often. This means more areas could see an exposure to creatures within the cryptid side of the house on this end. So the Kraken, when we're talking about things like oceanic shifts, when we're saying that the waters are getting too warm, a really great example is earlier this year we had one of our turtles from Florida, very funny, make its way all the way up to Norway. Now Norway hasn't seen a giant sea turtle before because it's tropical, so to them that was devastating to have a turtle that size come up to the boat. But it was because our current had warmed so much that that turtle just followed it, thinking it was the same general area, ending up all the way up in Norway, having to be brought back down. So when we're looking at changes in our currents, what does this mean for other sea creatures? It means that we are now experiencing more of them breaching up. So a big part of the Kraken, the belief was that yes, this creature probably does exist in size. Was it attacking on purpose, or was it decompressing from coming up too quickly from a depth in the ocean, thereby flailing as it died? And a lot of people back then couldn't swim, and boats were made out of very fragile wood and fell apart a lot more often. So subsequently you ended up with this sort of twofold. Was it likely a creature? Absolutely. Was it likely intentionally attacking with the purpose of eating? Less likely, because it would have to dive back down again. We do have numerous reports of these kinds of sized creatures washing up on shore in various countries. So when we're talking about this, we did just recently in 2024 have our first ever recorded colossal squid. So when we're talking about various sizes in squids, the deeper we can go when we create these vessels capable of handling the pressure, the better the results that we get to be able to tell people there is a reality to this. However, it's not in full scope of what we thought. And the same thing can apply to a lot of cryptids. Too many people report the same instance of something for us to just wipe it off and say, that's definitely not real, you're making it up, maybe you're high, drunk, sleep deprived, out in the cold for too long. If too many people in different regions say the same thing, it often yields a need for research. And so that's a big part of why I enjoy being here and hearing about everybody else who's out there doing these looks, is because I need to know as much as you do. On the other side of the house, we see some reports of things like extraterrestrials in general. So when we're doing any level of research and we come across anything that we think wouldn't be impacted by the general biome, and we wonder about that interaction, how many people may have seen it, how confirmed could this be? If so, what would be the purpose? It's obviously not eating off of the habitat, and it doesn't seem to be interacting like this one in particular floats. So thereby, does a flood impact it? Does a wildfire impact it? What would be the full implication of it within the biome becomes a massive field of research, because you just want to know in general, and it's that knowledge, curiosity, I think that drives a lot of my different research. So when we say things like it's going to be abnormally hot, winter food's going to change, wildlife's going to get more aggressive, maybe wildlife will turn on itself more often and turn on creatures that may be in the deeper parts of the forest, thereby driving them a little bit more into the sighting realm. So there's some different migration impacts that maybe don't impact the actual cryptid in and of itself, but maybe impact the general ecology of where it is and may drive it further into either densely populated areas or further away from those densely populated areas. Another fun additive, as it gets hotter in any way, shape, or form across the northern hemisphere, it will add to our presence of mist, which is often where we start to encounter a lot of these different creatures, is under the shroud of mist, and makes it far more difficult to discern what it is that you're seeing. And a lot of people want to attribute the mist to either, a government conspiracy or the creature itself. But to say that when it was hotter, we know this, when we think of the Jurassic era in general, we think of a hot, misty environment because of the heat and the evapotranspiration from the plants. So again, when we're talking about these things, that we're keeping in mind that as we go out to interact with them, we will be interacting with more hostile environment in general. So all of these different kind of nuggets are spelled out in a little PDF that you guys can get at the end. This one's a little fun and a bit of a joke, I know, yeah, I did that on purpose. But don't worry, I took it seriously after that. I thought it was funny. As somebody who was up in DC in general, it's always fun to tap into those. So this one is specific to South Carolina, and a little bit more fun when we're talking about impacts and changes to the swamp, because I lived in Florida for 6 years after Arizona, a major biome shift, I will say, as a ability to acclimate to that, very minimal. I moved away, but I did try, I want to say, for like 6 years. Hurricanes and me, maybe not the best friends. Monsoons and me, also though not. So now I live in Virginia. So when we're talking about some of the habitat shifts, extreme heat in the swamps can impact the water level, which, as I mentioned, can impact things like your aquifer, your groundwater, your river system in full, the whole operation of your water sector, thereby impacting things like mosquito prevalence, bacteria, algae blooms. That comes with cascading impacts. Some of the other things when we're talking about more mist, more fog, also means more gas releases from the swamp, which can be hazardous to inhale and interact with. For those of you who saw the family who died in California while hiking camping, that they died from a paralytic agent, and I know that was originally a big back and forth within a bunch of different governments, to say that there was a harmful algae bloom noticed there, and we know that as algae dies off in extreme heat and dries out, it aerosolizes. You inhale it, it triggers a form of dementia over time, but it does come with immediate things like liver failure, paralysis, and death. So when we're looking at this as an implication, be aware of where you are in hunting and hiking and camping, that you're watching out for a lot of these secondaries as you're going out to look for things. Now this one's on my side of the house. I'm a big nerd, so I just like looking at all the different ways in which I can tie anything that I say in a way to comply the knowledge base. So whether or not you believe in Lovecraftian creatures in general, or you believe in things like the mental shift of just paranoia kicking in and being able to mentally visualize any of these. It's just important to keep in mind each one of them comes from their own different biome and how biomes can be impacted. I did the same thing with the other side of the house. Up in DC right now is our Witch Festival, and that's a really interesting, I didn't even know that was a thing until today, so I'm missing that. But just other things to be aware of as we're talking about different historics. If we're saying that mist shrouds are getting worse, and people are going to start to see more things just in the generalities of more gas and more interactions, you're going to get a lot more recordings. The other side of the house, this is closer to my side, so I'm both in the Appalachians and then when I go to Arizona, so skinwalkers have always been a conversation. Some of the other things from that, Slender Man, which I think is my generation's doing, when we're talking about the different implications of just visibility, to be aware that extreme heat and exhaustion in general will often also yield a fear of being out and about in that nature setting. So this is going to continue to be a thing with the atmosphere of fear, the reduced visibility, isolation, because extreme weather will continue to do that with communities, and then the psychological impact of PTSD following extreme weather events. So there's a really sort of quick 101 on just the cryptid side. Now I'm going to get into a little bit of what I subject matter expertise in as an international expert, which is the actual trends and changes by statistic and by weather hazard for where you may live, where you may operate, where you might work. Some of the things that maybe you haven't considered when we're talking about these pivots. Different things like migration in the sense of displacement. That's both people and animals. So when we're saying displacement, Maryland now has 3 alligators, which we have not had before. And if you haven't seen the video of our police trying to move an alligator from a motel, they don't know how far away from a gator you need to be, and they're up on it trying to like corral it. Some of the other threats from that, we're seeing more shark attacks. People who thought certain parts of the beach were safe, or tourists from areas that maybe had never experienced a shark are now putting themselves at greater risk. So when we're talking about these trends and changes, be aware things like javelina and kune, our wild boars and pigs, are now attacking more often. When things are hot and uncomfortable, they take it out just like we do on the things around them. So whether or not it's for the purpose of eating, because most of these animals actually eat less in extreme heat, it is a form of aggression and violence that they take out on their surroundings. Other fun things, this is part of one of my fields of physics study. When we look at the vegetation and the side of the house with lightning strikes, and we say it's getting hotter, more humid, thunderstorms are getting taller, and there's more lightning, what does that mean to operate on a planet with more lightning? It actually means larger vegetation. So a great study from this is the Amazon rainforest. It gets struck by lightning all the time. We know this. Those trees are massive. That forest is dense. And when we look at the Jurassic era, we knew it was hotter back then, 100%. When heating the atmosphere and the atmosphere gets taller, it starts to push on the ionosphere more, creating a sort of lattice of ice that connects the top of the atmosphere down to the surface, connecting those conduits between the natural charge on Earth and the charge in the ionosphere. From that, we're starting to see that our vegetation that does get struck, what survives from not catching fire, will often yield greater size. It'll yield greater foliage. So when we're talking about where could this be going in the future, just keep in mind, I'm not saying everything's bad, I'm just saying it gets more intense. Not to say that we can't survive any of this, but to say that we need to be planning and keeping in mind when we're out and about in society that if I put out a severe weather warning, I am saying your odds of getting struck are far higher these days than they were about 20 years ago. On the other side of the house, for those of you who didn't know, lightning strikes in really tall, big storms go up as well as down. Those are called sprites when they shoot up and into space for the most part. And what that does is it creates an EMP-like ripple effect. So for low-orbiting satellites and our satellite constellations we're deploying now, some implications for their ability to operate going forward. So you may notice more latency, more lag, and general data upload, download speeds going down instead of up, despite our technological advancement. Now, I get a lot of people who are like, well, Sunny, it was hotter once on the planet once before. Yeah, we weren't here, our stuff wasn't here. Most of our stuff was put in this window of time. Between 1905 and 2020 was when we built our roads, our transmission lines, your home, our power plants, nuclear power plants in full concept. Most of our dams were put in, whether or not we planned for insulation, if we planned for flood walls, all of that was taken into consideration in this window of time. So when we say it's changed by a baseline of 1, and everyone's like, 1's not a lot, well, per degree of warming, there's a 23% increase in cloud-to-ground lightning strikes. Per degree of warming, there's a 4.5% increase in India of domestic violence. So when we're looking at these additives, we're taking that 1 degree causes a ripple effect. We're not saying you heat up a room 1 degree and someone stabs someone, but we're saying overall it creates a ripple that could inevitably lead to so much discomfort, loss of things like natural vegetation, and thereby result in that displacement of emotional stability. The other side of the house, if you are in a sauna and you increase the temperature by a little bit, it gets more humid. Can you create a thunderstorm in a sauna? No. Same thing in the atmosphere. You can make it insanely hot and humid. You will not get a thunderstorm without a low pressure. If the low pressures are changing, because the atmosphere is changing in height, they are often slowing down. They're packing a heavier punch with rain and these storms, so they're heavier. Thereby, their movement is reducing. You get more time under the high, which cooks you, gets all the moisture ready. Then the low comes in, and now it has this additive to dump down on you. So I'm not saying you're not going to get your year's worth of rain. You will still get your year's worth, if not maybe even a little bit more now. The downside with that is it will not come throughout the season. It will come as if your season has been compressed to a handful of events. That becomes problematic. We didn't build for that. Could we build for that? Absolutely, but we didn't.